I remember the first time I returned to the lake after all those years, how the water looked like a sheet of black glass under the heavy sky, the kind of sky that promises rain but refuses to break a weight, pressing down on your lungs until breathing itself feels like betrayal. The road was cracked, littered with fallen branches, and the town, once alive with summer laughter, had fallen into the kind of silence you can hear in your teeth. I parked my car near the old dock where the boards groaned under my boots, and I let my eyes sweep across the surface of that cursed lake. This was the place where my sister vanished. This was the place that stole her breath, her laughter, her life. And this was the place I had come back to in order to unearth the truth that no one dared speak. The locals had always whispered about the lake. Stories of strange accidents, of families torn apart, of bodies never recovered. They would shake their heads and mutter prayers, but when I asked questions, when I begged for answers about my sister, all I received were thin smiles and doors closing in my face. I left the town once, swearing never to return, but grief has a way of tying strings to your ankles. And when I received that anonymous letter, one sentence written in messy, uneven letters that read, "The lake doesn't take, it keeps," I knew I had no choice but to come back. The first night in my rented cabin was a battle against silence. The place was small, the kind of one-room retreat couples used to rent for honeymoons when the lake was still a tourist attraction. The wallpaper peeled like old scabs, the bed sagged in the middle, and the windows looked directly onto the water. I tried to sleep, but the lake pulled at my attention. The moonlight carved ripples into the surface, and I could swear I heard whispers slipping across the water, words I couldn't quite catch, words that tickled the edge of memory. At 2 a.m., I found myself standing at the window, heart pounding, convinced I saw a shape moving under the surface. Not a fish, not a shadow, but something long deliberate, as though it wanted me to see it. By morning, I pushed the paranoia aside. The town was as I remembered, a single main street with shuttered shops, an old diner that smelled of grease and burnt coffee, and faces that refused to meet mine. When I introduced myself as Anna's sister, conversations died instantly. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Chairs scraped back. The silence that followed me was louder than any scream, but silence cannot bury the truth forever. I went to the sheriff's office. The man behind the desk was older now, heavier, but his eyes were the same, calculating, tired, and afraid. He claimed again that Anna's disappearance was a tragic accident, that she drowned like so many others, that the lake had currents no one understood. But when I pressed, when I leaned forward and asked why no body was ever found, why the files on Anna were thinner than a grocery list, his jaw tightened. He told me to leave it alone. His hand hovered near the drawer where I knew his pistol slept. That was when I realized it wasn't that no one knew the truth. It was that everyone knew, and they were willing to keep it buried. I spent the afternoon wandering the lake's edge. The air smelled of rot and moss, and every step squelched in mud. I found the old boathouse, half collapsed, where Anna and I used to sneak cigarettes and whisper secrets when we were teenagers. I sat there for hours, staring into the water, replaying every memory of her, the way she laughed when she caught me lying, the way she always tied her hair into messy braids, the way she vanished that night without even a ripple to mark her absence. My grief was a stone in my throat, but beneath it pulsed something sharper, something alive, anger. The second night was worse. I heard the whispers again, louder this time, threading through the cabin walls, curling into my ears like smoke. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I caught fragments. My name, stretched and broken, and Anna's laughter, faint but familiar. I stumbled outside, barefoot on cold grass, the moon spilling silver on the water. And there, at the far end of the dock, I saw her. Or I thought I did. A figure, hair loose, dress pale, standing motionless, gazing into the lake. I called her name. My voice cracked, fragile, and she turned. Her face was wrong. It was Anna, and it wasn't. Her eyes were too wide, too dark, and her mouth curved into something between sorrow and hunger. Then, without a sound, she slipped into the water, leaving the dock empty. I didn't sleep after that. The days blurred. I asked questions, knocked on doors, cornered old men outside the diner, and though they all swore ignorance, their hands shook, their eyes darted to the lake as if it might overhear. Finally, one woman, a retired teacher with trembling hands and a voice like cracked glass, whispered the truth no one else dared speak. "Every few years," she said, "the lake takes someone, a debt, a sacrifice, always a young woman, always silence afterward. We don't choose, we don't fight, we endure. That's how it's always been." My skin crawled. A ritual, a cycle, a curse. Call it what you want. But my sister was not a sacrifice. She was not a debt to be paid. She was Anna. She was mine. That night, I took the journal I had found hidden under the cabin floorboards, the one I hadn't yet opened because the sight of Anna's handwriting made my stomach twist. Inside were pages of notes about the lake, about strange figures she had seen at night, about voices that whispered promises of peace if she just stepped into the water. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. "They're here, they're—" Nothing more. The cabin groaned around me. The whispers rose thick as a choir. I clutched the journal to my chest, tears stinging, rage building. If the town believed the lake demanded sacrifices, if they believed silence was survival, then I would be the one to break it. The lake didn't take Anna. It kept her, and I would tear it open until it gave her back. I could feel the air around Hollow S End changing, as if the lake itself had begun breathing through the streets, whispering to the ones who dared to listen, and clawing at the ones who dared to question. I had been in this town long enough to know its silence was not natural. Silence here was not peace, it was a cage, a carefully placed wall meant to keep something in and perhaps meant to keep me out. But I was already inside, and I was not leaving. Until I broke through. Nights came. Heavier the moonlight was sharp silver painted over black water. The surface of the lake shifting like skin that shivered under unseen touch. I began to dream things I could not name, faces I had never seen, but felt connected to voices of children echoing from beneath the water, as if they were playing in some world where drowning was not death, but a state of waiting. I woke each morning more tired than the last, sheets tangled around me, heart racing, but the pull was there stronger than before. By the third week, I started keeping journals. I wrote down every sound, every change, every fleeting shadow at the edge of my vision, words spilled on the paper like I was not writing, but being dictated to a script forced into my hand. I would read them back and realize they were warnings. Not notes. Sometimes whole paragraphs I did not remember writing appeared in my journal, begging me not to follow what I already had. The town had begun watching me in ways subtle but sharp glances held too long whispers that died the moment. I turned corners, shops refusing to sell me simple things until I pressed harder eyes that carried not hatred but fear, as though my presence had already sealed a fate they had wanted to avoid. Every smile brittle, every conversation short. The only constant was the sound of the lake always in my ears, even when I walked far into the hills. One night, while sitting near the shoreline, I saw her, a girl. Pale hair, tangled eyes, hollow as the wind that slipped across the surface. She stood barefoot on the water as if it were ground, not liquid. Her face was blurred by mist, yet I felt the sharp cut of her stare. I opened my mouth to speak, but she shook her head slowly, raised one hand, and pressed a finger to her lips, silencing me without sound. And then she sank, not falling, not thrashing, simply slipping beneath the surface like a memory erased. I went to the old archives the next day, the librarian reluctant hands shaking as she passed me crumbling papers that smelled of damp stone. I found records of missing children spanning decades, their names, written and crossed out in ink. Different handwriting, different times, but always the same. Cause drowned at the lake, body, unrecovered family left behind, and always a note that followed no further investigation. The curse was real, but curse was too small a word. What lingered here was hunger. It fed on silence. It fed on obedience. The town offered its sacrifice generation after generation, pretending to mourn, but always obeying, never fighting. And now I had stepped into its cycle, uninvited and unafraid. It was then that I discovered the ledger hidden beneath a false floorboard in one of the abandoned houses, pages soaked yet still legible names, dates, details of offerings. It was not only children. The ledger spoke of deals. Men who had crossed others, women who had broken vows, debts of betrayal, all resolved with a walk to the water and never a return. The town had used the lake not just as a grave, but as a weapon. And I understood then why they feared me, because I was not tied to their agreements. I had no debt to pay, no vow to uphold. I was a stranger who had come willingly, not dragged. I was not marked by them. I was marked by myself, and that made me dangerous to their cycle. The dreams sharpened. I saw not only children, but adults screaming beneath the water, their mouths open wide, yet no bubbles, rising as if the water itself denied them. Air denied them the dignity of last breaths. They stared at me, eyes pleading or accusing. I could never tell. Some nights I woke with bruises on my arms shaped like fingers pressed too tight, and yet no one had touched me in my bed. I confronted one of the townsfolk, an old man with eyes too tired to pretend anymore. I cornered him in the alley and demanded answers. He told me what no one else dared. The lake takes what it wants, but the people learned to give it what it hungered before it came on its own. If they fed it, they were left alive. If they resisted, it came for them all, and so they obeyed. I asked him who was chosen, and his silence was answer enough. The names in the ledger, not random, but chosen with purpose, chosen by those in power, chosen as punishment or payment, or both. My rage thickened, not for myself, but for those voices calling me in dreams. They were not victims of water. They were victims of men and women who made deals in shadows, cloaked their cruelty and superstition, and built their survival on the bones of innocence. And so my purpose shifted from curiosity to vengeance. I would not only uncover, I would not only write, I would burn the silence, I would drown the liars, I would make them hear the cries they had ignored. But vengeance was not so easily begun. For the lake was alive and it knew me. It whispered my name now, not in dreams but in waking, its voice a ripple across the glass of my drinking water, a murmur in the leaves, a hiss in the wind, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, but always mine. It wanted me closer. It wanted me to step willingly onto its surface, like the girl I saw it wanted to claim me. I refused. Instead, I mapped the houses of the ones whose names repeated most in the ledger, the same families generation after generation living, while others fed the lake. I knew their routines, I learned their weaknesses, I studied their faces in silence, waiting for the moment I would tear them from comfort and show them fear, the way they had shown fear to every trembling mother, every broken father. The first was easier than I expected. I followed him down the path to the docks late at night, bottle in his hand. His steps unsteady. I whispered his name and he froze, eyes wide as though the water had spoken instead of me. He turned but saw no one, and in that instant I pressed him forward, not with hands but with the weight of his guilt. His body crumpled into the lake, swallowed without splash. Only silence, only the faintest ripple, like the lake accepted him. I did not stop there. Night after night, I chose from the ledger, each name a key to another lock broken. Each life fed back to the hunger they had worshipped. But now it was not sacrifice. Now it was justice. And I became both priest and executioner. Not for the lake, but for the voices beneath it. And yet every life I claimed, I felt the lake pressing closer. The whispers louder, the dreams darker. I saw my own reflection bending in water, where my eyes were no longer mine but hollow and endless, like the girl I had seen. Perhaps this was its plan all along, to make me vessel, not victim, to turn me from stranger into saint of its hunger. But if that was true, then it had miscalculated, because I was not theirs. I was not here to serve, I was here to end, and I will end it. No matter the cost, no matter the blood, no matter the whispers, I will silence them with screams. I will turn the lake from grave into battlefield, and when its hunger reaches for me, it will find not a meal, but a mirror of everything it has taken and everything it will lose. The storm came the night I decided it would end, lightning tearing across the sky as if the heavens themselves were screaming at the lake to release its grip. The waves rose higher than I had ever seen, smashing against the dock, with fists of water spraying foam across the shore like blood from an invisible wound. The town hid behind shuttered windows. Doors barred, prayers muttered in trembling voices. But I walked into the heart of it. The rain slashing my skin, the whispers louder than thunder calling my name, not in menace but in hunger, and I answered not with surrender but with fury. I carried the ledger in my hand, its pages soaked but still legible, the names inked with betrayal, glowing in the flashes of lightning. Each name was a curse etched into the marrow of hollow ascend. I had crossed out so many already, but the last pages were filled with the names of the powerful, the ones who had fed the lake willingly, the ones who chose who lived and who drowned, and tonight their cycle would break. The path to the water was lined with shadows. Some townsfolk had dared to follow me, their eyes wide not with pity but with terror. They thought I was walking to my own offering. They thought I was the next meal, and that by letting me go they would be spared. They whispered prayers of thanks to the lake as if my body had already been claimed, and I smiled, for they would learn soon that I was not a lamb, but a blade. The girl appeared again, standing on the water, pale hair whipping in the wind, her hollow eyes fixed on me. This time she did not silence me. This time she pointed to the ledger in my hand, and then to the waves, her meaning clear. Finish it, drown their lies. Burn their names, carve justice into the water itself. I nodded, my heart steady, my rage sharper than any knife. I read the first name aloud, my voice cutting through the storm. Like steel, the lake answered with a swell, the whispers rising to a scream, and in the next flash of lightning I saw him. The man whose name I had spoken, dragged from his house by hands unseen, his body thrown across the ground toward the shore. His cries lost in the thunder, he begged. But no one helped, no one dared, and when he reached the dock, the water rose and took him, swallowing him whole before I spoke the next. One by one I called their names. The ledger bleeding ink onto my hands, with each page turned the lake obeyed, not resisting but aiding, pulling them from homes, dragging them through the streets. Each scream adding to the storm, the town watched, frozen in horror, as their leaders, their masters, their puppet strings were torn away by the very hunger they had served for centuries. And with each name I felt stronger, not weaker. The lake was feeding, but it was feeding through me. Not on me, it had mistaken me for a servant, but I had become its judge. I called every name until the last page was soaked black, the ink running into nothing, and then I tore the book in half, threw the pieces into the water, and screamed for all the voices it had taken. The surface broke. Hands burst from below, pale and rotting, grasping for air, for freedom, for vengeance. Faces rose, twisted yet familiar. The children, the mothers, the betrayed, all climbing out of their prison, gasping without breath, crying without sound. Their eyes met mine, and I felt their gratitude, though their mouths never formed. The words they did not attack, they did not beg. They simply rose and walked into the town. Their presence cold, their shadows endless, and the people screamed, not at me, but at them, the ghosts of their sins. The lake convulsed, waves slamming against the land as though it knew it was being emptied, hollowed of its power. The whispers no longer begged, they shrieked. 1,000 voices cursing me, damning me, warning me that this was not an ending, but a trade. If I emptied it, it would claim me. It would bind me to its depths to refill what I had stolen. But I refused. I would not be vessel. I would be fire. I stepped onto the water, lightning striking so close it burned the edges of my vision. I felt the surface hold me not like ground, but like a trembling beast beneath my feet. I raised my arms and spoke not names, but defiance, every word a blade cutting into the blackness. I told it that its silence was ended, that its bargains were ash, that its hunger was starved, and that it would never again feed on the living. The storm roared back, but I did not yield. The girl appeared once more, standing across from me, her figure clearer than before. I saw her smile. Though it was faint and broken, she raised her hand to her chest, and when she lowered it, the water beneath her exploded, dragging her down one last time. This time I did not feel sorrow. This time I felt release. The surface began to still, the storm easing, the rain softening, until all that remained was the quiet drip of water from my hair. The lake lay calm, dark, but no longer whispering the silence. Now was not a cage, but a grave. The town behind me wept. Some dropped to their knees. Some fled into the hills, but none approached me. I was not savior to them. I was reminder. I was the echo of everything they had buried. I turned away from the water, leaving the ledger torn, its pages sinking into the black. I walked through the streets of Hollow S End, the ghosts fading into mist behind me, their justice served, their chains broken. I passed the people who once watched me with suspicion. They lowered their eyes, unable to meet mine. They would rebuild. They would lie to themselves again. But they would never forget that one night the lake was louder than their silence. And yet, as I reached the edge of town, I heard it faint, a ripple in the distance. Not loud, not sharp, just a murmur, soft as breath, like a secret carried on the wind. It was not my name this time, but another name. One I did not recognize, whispered as though the lake had already chosen again, and I knew then that victory was never permanent. Hunger never ended. Curses never died. They only changed hands. I looked back once more, the surface still calm, the storm clouds breaking the first rays of dawn cutting across the black water, and I realized I had become part of its story whether I had wanted to or not. The ledger was gone, the families broken, the victims freed, but the hunger lingered, waiting for another name, another voice, another offering. And maybe one day it would come for me, but not today. Today the lake was silent, and that silence belonged to me.